Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Your Kundalini Bestie with me, your host, Lucy Wood. So, often when I do these solo episodes, it's when I'm seeing like common patterns coming up in clients and friendships and just in life, right? Which is always a mirror of what's going on in my life or like past experiences. Because I always say to people, like, typically who I work with is scenarios that I've been in myself, because there's that energetic match, right? There's that familiarity that subconsciously often sometimes we can be like, I know she's been through something similar and I want to reach out and work with her because she's come out on the other side. And I'm not saying I'm like, oh, this guru. Everyone who knows me knows that is the least thing that I preach, which is why, for example, my brand is called Bestie, right? Because I never portray to be this magical, enlightened human. I'm not enlightened. But what I wanted to cover in this week's episode, and it's around the energetics of love. So everyone's throwing this word around like narcissist, right? The N word. I personally do not like that word, but I know it's a lot of the language that people use and a lot of people can relate to. And what I'm seeing at the moment is clients really working through a lot of like self-hatred and self-guilt around why they've attracted a certain person in their lives in a love relationship scenario. And I always say this to everyone, and I can speak on my own behalf too, obviously. When we attract someone that has a toxic modality to them, they aren't good for our mental, physical, spiritual health, whatever we want to term it as, it's nothing to do with them. You might not like that, but it is nothing to do with them. It's an energetic piece in our body, in our soul, in our spiritual well-being that has seen that person as a familiarity. Right? And I can hear a lot of you being like, what? Like, what the fuck, Lucy? Like, no. You might not like that, but that is the reality when it comes to energetics. We attract what we put out there. We attract what feels good for us, what feels safe for us. And often at times it might not be safe for us, but it will feel familiar. And this is never any blaming or shaming. You're right or wrong. It's just a great growth opportunity. It's a great way to expand and remove these situations once and for all through the energetics in our body. So, firstly, how would you recognize this, right? So, say you look back on your patterns and you stop, you reflect, and you're like, there is certain similarities with the same people that I date, or there's just been like a really consistent long-term relationship that like has consumed your life over a period of time. What, as a young child, typically from the ages of 0 to 7, we're like sponges. We absorb energy, we absorb our brains are absorbing all the information around us from what our caregivers are doing, from what our caregivers accept in their lives. And it doesn't need to be mom and dad. It can be how you're raised by a nanny or a nursery or daycare. And for any parents out there thinking, shit, I'm going to just wrap my child in cotton wool, it doesn't make a difference, because our soul has chosen to be in certain situations, to trigger certain things, to work through certain things if they're at that point in their lives where they want to change. So typically between the age of 0 to 7, we will go through situations where there may be abandonment, for example, or there may be deep levels of like anxiety through a dysregulated nervous system that a parent may have, or a sibling, because there hasn't been that rewiring of safety. So typically it comes from safety in the body. But when we're often brought up in situations where we are taught that it's safe to be anxious, like the go-to feeling is to be anxious, the go-to feeling is to attract scenarios to rewire and continue that anxiety, to keep that adrenaline and that stress responses alive, because that is actually our safety mechanism. Then as an adult, we're going to grow and we're going to still continue to attract those outer world experiences to continue to morph and re-highlight that it's safe to be anxious. And until there becomes a point where, say, God forbid, you start getting things like irritable bowel syndrome, or you start having stomach problems, or some form of anxiety is affecting your body. It's typically the stomach, the gut, because the gut is so sensitive to environments and scenarios. And if we've been running on overdrive through a survival mechanism, which is typically what you will feel like when you are feeling unsafe in your body, your gut will often be the first thing that is just exhausted and burnt out, and you'll have something diagnosed by the doctor that isn't curable, like IBS, for example. And they'll just put it down to stress, which, fair enough, like that makes a lot of sense. But that's because your body has potentially been rewired to constantly be in this nervous state. Therefore, your relationships, whether that's friendships, whether that's lovers, whether that's husbands, wives, is going to continue to morph that. So when people come to me and they're like, I'm just healing from a heartbreak, the first thing I will typically do when it comes to the energy work is I will look at their root chakra, which is the base of your body. That's the stability, that's the grounding, that is the safety in yourself. And for depending on how or where you're at and where with the regulations of your body, I might just spend like a session or two purely just grounding you energetically, so that you are then safe to process all this trapped grief or trauma or just like anxiety in your body, to then release it. You never need to relive the events. You never need to see what happened. That is the beauty of energy work. But then when you come to work through things like your root chakra, and naturally then your solar plexus, which is your power center, which is basically just below your bra line for any females out there, and for any males, it's like just below your rib cage, basically. And that is where you store your power. So often there will be a lot of loss of power through allowing people to overstep your boundaries. A lot of emotional abuse and a lot of emotional trauma is deeply stored in there. And then we will work to remove that. And everything energetically is processed through the heart. The heart is 70 times more stronger than the brain. And then naturally, obviously, the heart is going to need some deep, deep nourishment, deep loving, and deep potential cord cutting and removal, depending on where you're at. Then, okay, a lot of you might think like, yeah, okay, whatever. You can read reviews for me. You can do all the research if you want, and you can see this from other people. Naturally, the first thing that will happen is that whoever you have been involved with, and imagine a lot of you can associate this anyway, whether you've done energy work or not, whether you have just made that conscious decision, subconsciously and consciously, to no longer be involved with someone, to no longer be dating someone, and then for, funnily enough, them to pop up or them to reach out to you, because they will energetically sense that something's shifted, something's changed. And they may not like that familiarity. They may still want to be in your life. And whether they're obviously unhealthy, of course, that is the last thing you want. But this is potentially, whether you call God, source, spirit, universe, I always term it as the universe, testing you, right? Being like, okay, we've done the inner work, we've done the energetic shift. As with everything, when your inner world changes, your outer world changes. Let's bring that person back into your life. Or let's bring another flavor, like another guy or another girl or unicorn or whatever you want to term yourself as, that can replicate that situation. And let's see how you react to that. And are you going to go left? I say to my clients, are you going to go right? And sometimes it can mean that you may need to have more lessons learned, and that you may go back to that, and you may go back to that because that might still familiar for you, right? That level of unsafety in your body hasn't been fully integrated. And I talk about integration so much, it's probably really boring for you now, but like 8% of the work that I do with my clients in person or online, in the container that we build, that's what I do. The 92% is your world, your outer world, your lifestyle, your choices, your changes, how you embody this new sense of you, or this authentic version of you into your reality. So that's often what I say to people, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, why do I keep attracting the same type? Am I, why am I dating this narcissist? Like, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm not sorry, but it's nothing to do with them. It's you. And like I said, it's not blaming you. I've been there. I had my first ever boyfriend who was abusive, and I ended up getting a 6-year restraining order against him. And I was 18 to 21. And that was so much energetic work that had been embodied in me as a child that it was safe to be around abuse. It was safe to be around emotional and physical abuse. It was safe to feel dangerous and on edge every night. That had been ingrained in me as a small child. And I'm so blessed now. I have done, the men in my life are incredible. Friendships or relationships. I have had a humongous shift in the relationships over the last few years of my life. And that's because I have changed the inner world within me. And don't get me wrong, there's still sometimes, the lighter you get, sometimes the polarity you attract, you're like a moth to a flame, right? But I'm quicker to see it and I'm quicker to understand it. And if my body feels off, I don't question it. I'm not interested. If my body feels good, then okay, let's go for it and let's try it. Sometimes that can be pretty triggering for some people, but for the right person, it's not. And so I've developed this deep level of trust in my body. If something as often doesn't feel safe, that 99% is because my body knows intuitively something isn't right here. The 1% is obviously if it's triggered something in me to remind me of a past event that I've not worked through. Great, perfect. Let's sit with it. Let's try it. Let's work through it. Let's do some energetics on it. Let's do some shadow work. Let's really embody and release this. And I just want to share that with people today because I think so many people spend so much time slating off relationships, slating off ex-lovers, partners, boyfriends. But the reality is you attracted it. And if you're not going to work through it, then nothing changes if nothing changes. So for anyone out there listening that's like, holy shitballs, I will add in the link below to do an online session with me. I do not do straight up online sessions unless I know your energy. So what I would do is a consultation first, literally 15 minutes, whether it's online or in person, to feel into energy, to see where you're at body-wise, because we need to see how ready you are and how safe you feel, right? Because there's no point in working through a body that doesn't feel safe to do this work. So we can always take a step back and do other gentler ways to make the body feel safer and nurtured to be ready to release this. Because a lot of the time, if that's our go-to safety mechanism, why would we want anything else? It feels unsafe to be safe, right? Wild. But a lot of us are moving around this planet feeling unsafe, which is why we attract these fearful situations. So I'm sending you so much love. That was such a quick one, but I just wanted to share that one this week. For anyone that has any questions, wants to slide in my DMs, as always, you know where I am, and I'm sending you so much love. Mwah.